Hey there.
Welcome.
Welcome back to Plant That Sis.
My name's Taryn.
And I'm Tate.
And this is our podcast all about houseplants. Welcome back, everybody.
We are so glad to be here.
Our episode today is honestly talking about the worst thing about having houseplants, which is all about pests. Pests are the worst. Pests
Worstest.
are the worstest.
They suck.
Okay, I don't know about you, but I personally think that having bugs in the house is horrible. I hate that moment when I feel like I have bugs in the house, so obviously, there's a reality of having plants in your house. There are going to be bugs and pests, and to me, that's one of the worst things about having houseplants. Plus, you spend so much time and energy and money on caring for your plants and trying to keep them beautiful and thriving, so it's really, really sad and frustrating, and you can feel really discouraged when you're watching them decline due to pests.
And nobody likes having a ton of bugs just crawling around your place. Yeah, no.
So this episode, we're doing more of a overview. So we're going to kind of touch on lots of different ways you can prevent pests. We're going to touch on common pests. We're not going to go into too much detail. And then we're going to just throw out lots of different ideas that we have heard about how to prevent or treat pests, I should say. We haven't necessarily tried all of them firsthand, but there are things that are on our list to try if we haven't tried them already. So I think that one of the things that is something I don't know a lot about, honestly, is the ethics, I guess you could say, of pest prevention and treatment, especially when it comes to the not natural stuff. And I think there's a time and a place for everything, but there's a big difference in the things that are natural and okay to use, especially if you're somebody that has kids or pets or anything like that, they could somehow, some way get a hold of it. Despite how hard you try to keep that from happening, it definitely can happen. And then there's also, I think, something to, and Tate, you could probably explain this better than me, but there's probably something to what you can use inside your house versus plants that you have outside in the actual environment.
Yes, for sure. So if you have a lot of plants outside that you're trying to, you have a pest problem on them, it's always best to use organic or natural pesticides, because when we use inorganic pesticides, they have a large effect on the environment. And it's one of those things where doing it one or two times may be okay, but when you keep doing it over and over and over, it's really not good for the overall environment. I know we don't like bugs and pests on our plants, but I think it's important for us to recognize that bugs are important to the ecosystem and to the environment out there, and as much as we don't like them on our plants, when we use pesticides, we may kill bugs that are actually helpful to our plants, because believe it or not, some bugs we need for the plants to be there, and we don't want to throw off the balance of nature, right? So it's really important to use natural pesticides if possible. I know those may not be as effective, or they may be less convenient, but that is the best way to go about it, because you don't want to leach those other pesticides into the soil where it will have contaminating effects, and then when it rains, those pesticides go into our collective water, and there's just all kinds of trouble there. So yeah, it's just best to use organic or natural pesticides for outside. But for inside, if your plants are solely inside, they're not going to go outside ever, then I think it's a bit more flexible, because it's not going to leach out into the ecosystem, and it's solely set inside your home. So you can be a bit more flexible, I would think.
Yeah, I think those types of things have a lot more, speaking of using harsh pesticides out in the environment, they have a lot more lasting effects than I think we realize, myself included.
Yes, for sure. So I won't get too deep into the politics on pesticide regulation here in the U.S., but I think it's interesting that, here there are a lot of pesticides that are illegal in other countries due to environmental or even health effects that are actually legal here, and that is used on our food a lot. So, like I said, I don't know the politics side behind it. I just know the science side behind it. So I don't want to get too detailed because
It's
I don't
definitely
know.
interesting, and there's definitely many things outside of talking strictly pesticides that are legal in the U.S. that are illegal a lot of other places, namely tons of food. The fact that there are so many, like the same company makes the same product. For example, Quaker oatmeal, and the American version of that product has all these crazy things in it, and then the European version of that product does not. And my husband Kyle, he's an engineer and works in the nuclear industry, I guess you could say, and he's in charge of making sure that their products that are going to these companies overseas are meeting the overseas regulations, and they are significantly more strict. So that's kind of a theme. It's not just fertilizer that's like that, which I know you know that, Tate, but it's very interesting.
I mean, Quaker Oats here probably has like 3 tablespoons of sugar in it.
And a bunch of things you can't pronounce, and so back to the pest issue, especially with our indoor houseplants. Some signs that you may be having a pest issue. Just in general, if your plants aren't growing and thriving, that's sometimes your first telltale sign to nip something in the bud or get it before it's a huge issue. So if your plants are in general maybe not getting enough light, or the watering situation is bad, just any plants that are weak and unhappy are more susceptible to pests. Pests are attracted to the plants that they know are already struggling. So some signs that you will for sure see, so if you start to see any of your leaves looking deformed, so they're not a flat shape or whatever shape they're supposed to be, if they're starting to look wrinkled and deformed, that can be different things. That could definitely be an overwatering or underwatering issue too, but that is a sign. When I see that, that's my first thing is like, oh no, what pests do I have? Another one is yellowing leaves, which we laugh all the time about the whole yellowing leaves thing. Yellowing leaves can mean a million things, and it can mean nothing, but it's definitely, when I see a yellowing leaf, it's a cue or sign for me to just check and make sure I don't see any pests or can't identify any pests. Sticky substances on the leaves, if you're feeling any sort of, I don't want to say wax, but sticky residue left over on leaves, that's definitely can be a sign of pests. Webbing on leaves. So this one, I definitely have some spiders. There is one. I have an alocasia, and I have it inside of a cover pot that's pretty big, and there is a big spider that lives in there. And Tate, you'd be really proud of me because I leave it alone, even though it freaks me out every time I go to water it. It kind of runs around, and I'm like, ah!
I am proud of you.
But it's eating other stuff, right? So I just leave it.
Yes, yeah. I mean, if I have spiders and they're just mind their own business somewhere, which usually they do, honestly, I leave them because, yeah, they eat all those other little bugs that we don't like.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm proud of you.
Thanks.
Nice.
Nice. I will say, so I definitely have spiders that are not spider mites. Spider mites are pests for houseplants. Spiders are not. So sometimes I see some webbing that I can tell is just plain spiders jumping from plant to plant, which makes me really uncomfortable, but it's different. There's a certain type of webbing on leaves that is spider mites, which are spiders. They are arachnids, I'm pretty sure, which we'll kind of touch on here in a minute. But if you see webbing, you definitely want to look and make sure it's not spider mites because those are really hard to get rid of. And then I kind of already touched on this, but if you have a plant that was thriving, doing awesome, and then you're starting to notice it's not really growing, it's maybe not looking bad, but just it kind of dawns on you. I feel like I have that moment where it dawns on me. I'm like, I feel like this hasn't pushed out a new leaf. That's just always a good time to check on it. Again, it may not be pest related, but something's up. Of course, there's seasonal changes, right? We're in the winter season right now, so a lot of my plants for sure are not doing as great as they do in the summer when they get full days of sun, but it's definitely just as much easier. I know we've said this in the past, but it's much easier to prevent pests, and the earlier you catch it, the easier time you're going to have being able to get rid of the pests. So the sooner that you can check and make sure nothing's happening, or check and if something's happening, act on it, the better off your plant will be, which I guess is obvious.
Absolutely. So next we're going to talk about some types of pests. And we're not going to go into too much detail like Taryn said earlier. This is more of a broad overview of some things you might see. But this pest in particular, Taryn has had interesting experience with. So Taryn, tell us about mealybugs.
Yes, so one of the most common houseplants is mealybugs. These are small little white fuzzy bugs. They kind of look like a little white dot. And they're mostly stationary. I feel like I've seen videos of them moving, but in my experience, they're always still. I think especially early houseplant, maybe not early, but beginner houseplant people, and I was especially this way. I expected pests to be super hyper obvious and kind of like running around on the plant. So I think it's good to note that really a lot of these pests, but especially mealybugs, at least in my experience, they're not really like crawling around. They find a place and they kind of leach into your plant. They really like to hide under the leaves where the leaf meets the stem, or just really wherever they can hide. They kind of get into the folds and the cracks so that they obviously are less detectable. These guys love anything more succulent variety. So succulents, obviously cactus or cacti. Hoya, they really like Hoya. They're not great. They are relatively easy to get rid of. I haven't had any. Well, I will say I did have a couple big propagation trays full of baby succulents that I was growing, and they were doing good for so long. And then somehow mealybugs got in there and ravaged it, and I had to throw it all out. So other than that experience, any of my actual plants I've been on, I haven't lost any of them due to mealybugs. But again, had I let those infestations grow and become actual major infestations, I probably would have. So mealybugs are probably the most, that's my most common pest that I've had to deal with, aside from maybe the next one, which are fungus gnats. Those little boogers. Hate them.
Yeah, I feel like we both have had fungus gnat issues.
So fungus gnats are tiny gnats. You guys know gnats. They're very small flies. They love to lay eggs in wet soil, and they love to fly into your orifices.
Yep.
Especially, I swear, it's like when I'm on my phone at night, they are attracted to the light, and then they go up my nose, and it makes me so mad. And I'm like jumping around in bed, probably waking Kyle up.
It's disgusting.
That's disgusting. So fungus gnats are actually not that harmful to your plant. They can be, obviously, like we said, with any of these, the bigger the infestation, the more problematic. But of all of these are the least damaging to your actual plants. They're just a real pain in the ass.
And they just, like, they're, like, the most obvious, I feel like, out of all the pests we're going to talk about. Like, these are the ones that you will be seeing the most when you're walking around your house or doing anything in your house. Like, these ones will be flying around and buzzing around your face, like Taryn said. So even though they're not, like, as harmful to your plants, they're still just, like, really annoying.
Really
and gross
annoying
to have flying around.
Yeah, this is the one and only pest, at least in my experience, on this list that, yes, like Tate just said, you can tell that they're there because they're flying into your face. The next one, I think I just had my first experience with, but it's thrips. They're barely visible to the naked eye. They're teeny tiny. I think they're mostly black, but I think obviously with all of these pests, there's different kinds, and there's, of course, varieties and variations. But for what I think we deal with in our area, they're black, but you really can hardly see them at all. And how you can tell that you're having a thrips issue is they leave these silvery kind of dots or streaks of damage. It's a real weird look. It almost looks bluish. I got this, I believe, I'm not really 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure this is what happened to one of my elephant ear, one of my alocasias. I started to see these silvery dots and the leaves started really drooping. So obviously there was an issue, and to be really honest, I just put it outside because I haven't had time to deal with it. But that's kind of how you can tell there are thrips. I've also heard you can put a piece of paper, like a white piece of paper, or just have, an easy to tell background, I guess you could say, under the leaf and kind of shake the leaf. And if you see black, almost like dust particles, it looks like, then you know you have pests.
Ooh,
of some
I would
kind.
not be shaking that leaf. Get
I
the
know.
thrips everywhere.
Next one, we kind of talked about spider mites. These are teeny tiny spiders that leave webbing. They really love palm trees, anything of a palm variety. They really are attracted to, among other things. And they absolutely thrive in warm and dry conditions, which is why this time of year is the worst for spider mites. If you can keep those plants, especially palms, they like a lot of humidity, so they'll be happier anyway. But if you can keep them moist, if you can spray them, which there's a lot of talk about whether you should mist or not mist your houseplants, and there's a lot of opinions out there, and different people have different experiences. But that is if you can keep the humidity up, that'll help keep those spider mites at bay. But a way you can tell you have them is looking for a little webbing between the leaves, which is real obvious on a palm type plant. The next one is scale. And I don't know why this one grosses me out so much. It's a flat disc-like pest, and they are pretty immobile. I'm pretty sure they are very much a pest that once they kind of hunker down on a spot, they hunker down. They, unlike a lot of these other pests, if you hose it down, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to prevent and how to treat pests, but if you, first thing really is to wash that plant off, give it a real good shower, a steamy good shower. Scale will not come off because they're almost like, if you guys played Super Mario, what are they called, Tate? The like black, it's like the same thing as the turtle. You can like bump it and then it'll go do 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 back and forth, but those little black ones.
Oh, yeah. I know what you're talking about. I just don't remember what they're called.
Me either.
They're like little hedgehog looking things, kind of.
Yeah.
They have like a big shell.
Yes, so essentially these are kind of like that. This is obviously not a very scientific description, but they kind of have like a shell situation, so you have to use like either your fingernail or some kind of tool to like scrape.
Ooh, so you gotta like lift it up.
You gotta like get under it and scrape them off.
Have you ever had scale on anything?
I don't think so.
I haven't either. Luckily.
But I've watched videos, because when I was trying to figure out what I think are thrips, I was having a hard time telling. So I watched some videos of like major scale infestations and people just like using their fingernail to dig them off. And I was not into it.
Are they insects?
Great question. I don't know.
Or is it like a fungus?
I think they're insects.
Okay. Weird.
But I could be wrong. And then one that I have no experience with, not that I've experienced all of these, but one that I see on lists a lot, but to me is something that's such an outside bug, and maybe it's because I read The Little Ladybug, that book, that children's book growing up, but aphids, and how you can tell that it's aphids versus other things. I believe they're, like I said with one of the other pests, there are different kinds. There's green ones, brown ones, black ones. But how you can tell aphids from another teeny tiny pest is they like to crowd together on stems, especially around new growth, which is pretty common for a lot of pests. They really like that new juicy baby growth. But they crowd together. So if you see a whole bunch of little tiny bugs in one spot, that would be my first suggestion, is maybe see if you think that they might be aphids.
You could just, introduce a bunch of ladybugs into your house. That'll take care of the aphid problem.
I mean, of all bugs, that might be one of the most bearable, right? Ladybugs.
They're pretty cute.
Pretty classic. Non-threatening.
They're good luck if they land on you, right?
That's right.
So if you introduce them to your house, you're just going to be
full of good luck.
Really lucky.
So some prevention methods. I know we've said it in this episode, we've said it in other episodes, and I learned this the hard way, mostly with fungus gnats, which are least damaging to your plants, so I'm grateful for that.
But the most annoying to deal with.
But so annoying. It is much, much easier to prevent against pests than it is to treat them once they're already an issue. So just some basic prevention methods. Again, we haven't necessarily tried all of these, but these are things that in my time of looking up how to deal with pests, because I've had my fair share of issues, these are the things that are most common, I would say. First one is a neem oil and soap spray. This is what I do often. I try to do this once a week, just as is, like every weekend. Of course, I'm not perfect. I miss it sometimes, and we literally sat down to record this episode, and I clapped, and killed a fungus gnat, so obviously they may not be the most across the board effective, but it's a great, easy preventative that doesn't harm your plants if you don't do it too much. So neem oil, spelt Neem oil. I make my own. You just get the cold pressed neem oil, and I use the Dr. Bronner's Castile soap, but you can really just use dish soap. You put just a little bit into a water bottle, fill it with water, shake it, and then spray it. Another one that I have purchased, I own these and I've never tried them, or I haven't tried them yet, are called mosquito bits. They're obviously used to prevent or deter mosquitoes. A couple things you can do with these. You can sprinkle them on top of the soil, though I will say I have heard, haven't done it, but I've heard that they can kind of mold over time, which is gross. Ew. Not super harmful, I don't think, to your plants, but just kind of gross. So you can also mix them into the soil, so it's a little less obvious that that's happening in your plant. And you can also do sort of like a tea where you steep these little mosquito bits in water and then just water your plants with them. Another one that I personally love because it looks good, but it's one of those things that's kind of hard to do. If you have a lot of houseplants, it's hard to do and keep up with. But if you put some top dressing on your soil, that can help prevent against especially things like fungus gnats. The smaller the substance, the better. So I have a bunch of different top dressings that I like to use. I have some that are big, almost like full-on rocks that I like to put on top of some plants. And then you have your little tiny pebbles, and then you can get all the way down to sand. Sand is the most effective. Basically, that's so much less room for them to be able to dig down into the dirt. So the less room that they could crawl between stuff, the better. But that can definitely help keep your soil inaccessible, I should say, to pests.
So that just means, like putting it on the top of the soil. So like when I think of sand, I never thought of that. That's so smart because they're not going to dig into the sand. But if the plant has like, okay, like, it's whatever soil it needs under it, it's usually fine, right?
Right. And the sand doesn't hold moisture, so even if you top water, obviously the water will drain out of the sand really fast. So it's dry and they can't really get in there.
Okay, interesting.
You'll see this really common with succulents. That might help you visualize it a little bit better. A lot of succulents, especially cool arrangements, they'll have a lot of top dressing going on there, but you can do it with your other houseplants. And from what I've understood, I kind of held off on doing it on some of my plants at first because I didn't want it to prevent new growth from being able to come up, but I don't think that's a major issue.
Do keep in mind, though, at least from my experience, when I do put like top dressing, like rocks on it, or I haven't tried sand personally, but I have tried rocks, big rocks, small rocks, it does keep the soil moist for longer. Like I feel like it kind of traps the moisture in there, so do be aware of that.
Such a good point.
If you do it, yeah. So don't it may be tempting to like water your plant like normal, but if it has top dressing on it, that moisture will stay in the soil for longer, so just keep that in mind.
Such a good point. So glad you said that.
Learned the hard way. So learn from my mistake.
Okay, the next one that I've heard is
your favorite.
So gross to me. Cinnamon is a natural deterrent to pests, and I hate cinnamon. I hate it.
Yeah, I think cinnamon is like a antifungal.
Ah.
That's what I've read, and like I've used it for that, and it seems to work. I mean, I've heard that if you put in moldy soil, or like if you have mushrooms growing out of your soil, which I occasionally will get
outside, me too.
The cinnamon is supposed to deter the fungus. So I haven't heard much about insects, but it would make sense because cinnamon's a pretty strong like scent or whatever it is.
It is a really strong scent and odor.
Yeah.
Ugh.
It's delicious. I live for cinnamon.
Yeah, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I hate it. So that's a really, most people probably have that in their little spice cabinet. Super natural thing to use. You could also use cayenne pepper. This, I think, is more, honestly, for outdoor pests. For example, Kyle's sister had issues with squirrels getting at her plants that she had outside, and so she tried putting spicy stuff on top so they wouldn't eat it. So that's just something you could try that you might have on hand.
I've done that too.
Oh, you have?
Yeah, so on my yucca, I had spider mites, and so what I did was I mixed, honestly, I don't remember the full concoction, but it was some kind of cayenne pepper soap mixture, and it worked. They did not
weren't
like
into that.
The cayenne pepper soap. It could have just been the soap, honestly, but if just some biology facts for you guys. The whole reason that plants are spicy, like peppers and stuff are spicy in the first place, was to deter insects from eating them. Us, we like them, we like that spice, but insects don't, so that's probably why cayenne pepper is a good deterrent.
Like that's why they adapted and evolved that way?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and then humans took that to a new level, right? Like we were like, oh, let's make them even spicier, but in general, yeah.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yep. That's also why caffeine's a natural pesticide that coffee beans use and other plants use. Fun facts.
And we love it.
And
humans can't get
we
enough
live
of
for
it. The next one is Diatomaceous Earth. So essentially, this is one of those that I think can be really harmful and dangerous in the environment, but something that is an option if you have in your house. It's essentially like microscopic, teeny tiny shards of glass, I think. So essentially, if you put it in your soil, like kind of mix it in, definitely wear gloves and definitely wear a mask if you open the bag, because again, if you start breathing that into your lungs, that can be harmful.
Ooh, yeah, that sounds dangerous.
A little bit mixed into your soil, then essentially when the bugs are moving through the soil, it kind of slices up their body.
Dang, that's
which sounds really graphic.
It's pretty metal.
Yeah, it's pretty freaking metal. And even the name, Diatomaceous Earth.
Yeah, sounds pretty
sounds
metal.
So intense.
Make sure y'all wear your gloves, wear your masks for that. Don't be buying.
Do your own research.
Don't buy it and then be like, let's just open this bag and do it. I would hate to injure anybody on accident.
Right. We are not held liable. I'm just kidding. That's also something if you want to go down the route of maybe natural is not the right word. Basically, pests that eat other pests. They're not pests. What's the word I'm thinking of? If you want to get bugs that are going to eat your pests.
Yep. Like little predators.
Yes, predators. Yep. Diatomaceous earth will harm them too. So if that's something you want to do at any point or you consider, that's something you want to make sure you eradicate.
Yeah, definitely don't do that outside.
Yes.
Keep that indoors.
Should not happen outside. Yeah. Another kind of preventative, this is super easy, cleaning out any debris as much as possible. So any dead leaves that fall off or anything that could start rotting or decaying within your soil. That's something outside is not as big of a deal because there are bugs and worms and things to help break that down. But in your house, you don't have that as much, and that can attract the fungus gnats into your soil. Another just really easy thing that I've gotten into the habit of doing myself is quarantining your new plants. I know quarantine, that word makes everyone want to die on the inside, but it's really helpful.
We're all familiar with what that means, you know? We all know at this point what that means.
Yeah, don't need to explain what quarantine means. But
I'm crying.
Any new plants, I know, right? Any new plants that you get, my very first thing, and again, I've learned the hard way on this. I'm pretty sure I've brought in plants that had pests, and then I just stick them right in with all my other plants, and it looks so cute, and then I get a major infestation of whatever kind, mostly fungus gnats, but of whatever kind. Having a designated spot for your new plants that you get so that you can keep an eye on that, and I immediately, when I bring them home, do my neem oil spray, and then I keep them in a totally separate room where I don't have any plants.
Isolate, isolate, isolate.
Yes, I would say at least 2 weeks. People definitely recommend longer. The longer you can do it, the more, safe and sure you can be. But give it at least a couple weeks. I try to get a couple neem oil sprays in so that it'll, especially again with fungus gnats, you want to catch all the life cycles. Or you want to get every stage of the life cycle, so you may not see any fungus gnats flying, but if it had fungus gnats, then the babies are in the soil, so you want to give it some time to make sure you work through any of those issues before you introduce it into its super cute permanent spot around all your other plants. And then if you have a really intense, let's say you've tried all these different organic options and natural options, and you're having major issues. There are systemics, I think they're called, which is the non-organic sprays that can be harmful. So like we said earlier, there's a time and place for things, and you all need to do your own research, and you know what's best in your home. It's kind of a last-ditch effort before you have to just give up the plant. And sometimes that happens. It be like that sometimes, which sucks, but you want to be careful with these, and you want to use them extremely sparingly, but those are an option out there also.
Yeah, and especially if it's on a house plant, I feel like you can be a little more, I don't want to say it's a little more safe, but it's if it's in your house and you've tried everything, like you can be, it's up to you. Just be careful when you bring those outside. Really.
So, what do we do if we know we have pests? Even if you don't know exactly what kind, obviously every type of pest has different specific ways that you can address those issues. But just the very first thing you should do if you think you have a pest, give that baby a good shower. You want to wash the whole plant down. You want to use something to clean the leaves, both sides. So making sure you're getting up under, because a lot of pests like to be up under the leaves. Where the leaf meets the stem, all those kind of creases and crevices, you want to make sure you get in there and physically wash off anything you can as gently as possible. Obviously, you don't want to get wild and rough with your leaves, depending on what kind of plant you have, but you want to just physically try to remove everything you can. After you give that good shower, then you want to really get into that inspection mode and physically remove any pests that you can still see. Again, depending on what pest you have, this can look really different. But physically removing those pests is going to obviously be super, super helpful. The next thing you want to do is treat your pest issue. So use your pest spray or whatever treatment method you're going with after you really rinse that sucker down. Get everything off physically with your hands or your toothpick or your Q-tip or whatever that you can. Then you want to use your pest treatment, whether it's a spray or you're going to repot the plant, which might be helpful, again, depending on what pest you have. And then from that point on, you want to have a set schedule. I know we don't always say that for a lot of care things, but you want to have a very consistent way to go back and make sure that those pests aren't coming back. Again, I know we just talked about this a little bit, but there are life cycles to bugs. I can't explain them all. There's, it varies per pest, but you may take the adults off, but the babies may still be lingering somewhere. So you want to make sure, no matter the pest, that you have a follow-up plan. Schedule that follow-up appointment, whatever you got to do to make sure that those pests aren't continuing to mate,
reproduce.
Procreate. Reproduce is the word I was looking for. That's the one.
Yeah, you definitely want to keep up with that because they will do their best to survive, right? Like, they want to live, so you gotta really keep a regimented, like, get rid of them.
And I know we said this for when you get new plants, but same thing really for any plants that you're dealing with pest issues. You want to keep it away from other plants. Most pests, probably not all, but most pests can travel from plant to plant. So if you keep it near a bunch of other plants, then that's already a big pain in your ass to deal with. That one plant can spread to many of your plants, and that can get overwhelming and depressing really fast. So definitely make sure you have that sucker, again, quarantined for the safety of everybody else.
All right.
Any other thoughts on pests that you have, Tate?
No, I think...
Any experiences you want to share?
I think we covered everything, but I would like to hear from everyone else. If anyone else has any other tips or tricks that they have used at work that we didn't talk about here, please feel free to share it with us on our Instagram at plant.sis. You can always share it with us on Twitter or on our email. Our handles are the same for all of them, at plant.sis. We would love to hear from you guys. If this episode was helpful or not, let us know. We want to hear from other people and want to hear other people's experiences.
100%. Our email is plant.sis@gmail.com. Just in case you want to shoot us an email, we could be pen pals. Let us know your pest solutions. I will say too, just as kind of a disclaimer, everyone should do their own research. And there are things, just like everything with houseplants, there are things that work for one that do not work for another. So yes, the more tips that you guys have to share, the better. And we would love to help spread and share those because we are all in this together in fighting against those pests.
Yep.
For our next episode, just to give you guys a little heads up on what's to come, we are doing our first project-based episode, and we are going to be talking all about how to mount or create a staghorn fern mount. So join us as we talk about, I have 3 different ferns that I want to mount, and I'm going to try to do some different things with each to see what the best method is. So join us as we talk all about that next week. Thank you guys so much for listening. We are so grateful to have you join us. We would love to hear from you. We would love any suggestions you have. We hope you have a great week as we move into February.
I guess on that, see you guys next time.
Goodbye.
Bye.